When people ask me what is design thinking or what can we take away from design thinking, I always go back to the old, there was a Gregory Treverton who was at the RAND Corporation thinking about policy problems and global policy and specifically. And he said there are two types of problems. There are mysteries and there are puzzles. Puzzles are problems where when you have the right level of data disclosure, when you have that absolute number, the problem can be solved. So this is, in his example, he said, it's finding Osama bin Laden. If we had GPS coordinates, we know where he is. There's another category of problem called mysteries, where there is no single piece of data, there is no level of data disclosure that will actually solve the problem. In fact, there might be too much data, and it's about interpreting all of the data that's there. And that's a richer, harder problem that requires more systems thinking, that requires prototyping and piloting. And that's really where the designers are often most adept at playing, is within a situation like that. And the example he gives is rebuilding Iraq, right? There's no single piece of data that's going to make it easier. It's just about trying different things and experimenting and trying to move forward towards a solution. Well, we're never going to have enough information. We're never going to have the right information. We just have to interpret what we have now and do the best that we can. And I think when we start to resolve those is when good things happen. But certainly it's the mysteries that get designers excited. Too often in the corporate world, there's the belief that we can use these PowerPoint reports and these charts and these statistically significant surveys to generate ideas from it. And in many cases, that does work for incremental improvements. But if you want something more disruptive, you really have to go into the field and find something proprietary and experience it for yourself and see it for yourself.
There's a suite of abilities that are becoming more valuable because they have certain attributes to them. They are difficult to routinize, difficult to turn into an algorithm, and when you can't force them into a set of rules, when you can't essentially create an algorithm for doing them, then that makes them hard to outsource and hard to automate, and therefore more valuable. So it's things like design and design thinking. It's things like narrative and story, which I think is tremendously overlooked and undervalued in a whole range of business functions. Symphonic thinking ability, which is big picture thinking, pattern recognition, multiness, multi-discipline, multicultural, multilingual, a sense of breadth. Empathy, which is, at least to me, one of the ones that I'm most interested in, which is the capacity to stand in someone's shoes, see with their eyes, feel with their hearts. Again, very difficult to routinize, very difficult to automate or outsource. Play, laughter, humor, and games, and then also meaning, a sense of purpose, a sense of significance. And precisely because these abilities are hard to turn into a set of rules, that makes them harder to teach in the explicit way that we think of teaching something. But they're things that can be learned.
There's not necessarily a great deal of agreement on what design thinking is, but in general, or I should say that even if that's the right term that we should be using, some designers get upset at design thinking, and some other people, especially business people, sort of get put off, like they're not thinkers. I think that if you reduced it, design thinking is a way of approaching a challenge that offers just another skill set and another approach that's complementary to other forms of thinking, other forms of product development. And it centers around some constructs that come from the design world. So both convergent and divergent thinking, prototyping and iteration, a certain kind of customer research that's much more ethnographic or qualitative. All those things together sort of form a rubric of what design thinking is about. If the whole of business traditionally was about design thinking, then there would be a whole new movement about analytical thinking or quantitative analysis. It's too much to say that it's the answer to every problem. It also isn't accurate to portray it as the only way of thinking, doing, managing, leading, etc. It really is one half of, or one part of, this holistic approach to management and leadership that has been missing for a long time. So by integrating design thinking into management, into leadership, by all means, it has a tremendous amount of promise to integrate and balance out a full set of skills. but it only because it's been missing all along, not because there's something inherently incredible about it.
How does design thinking fit with traditional strategy in organizations today? And for me, it boils down to two things. What traditional strategy has given us is it's given us strong analytics, great data from which to make the most logical of decisions about where we need to move in the future. What design thinking gives us is it gives us curiosity, the ability to look out into the world and find new solutions to traditional problems. It also gives us the power of observation, which takes data and puts it into the context of a given situation, a given point in time. And I think that's where the two can be married in a really significant way. What does design thinking have to contribute to business? I think for me it boils down to the fact that there's the types of challenges our leaders face today are so vastly different than the ones that have been faced in previous times. And so you take wicked challenges like sustainability. This challenge we won't solve our way out of in our lifetime in business. It's always going to be there. And so design thinking gives you flexibility. It allows you to be curious. It keeps you on trend and on point with where that wicked problem is today, and allows you to generate prototypes and solutions that may or may not be the answer, but they'll move you in the right direction.
I think one of the more interesting examples is in a giant company like Procter & Gamble, which I think has done some really, really interesting things. I mean, if you think about empathy, there is a move in market research of all kinds toward more ethnographic research of really understanding how somebody uses a product or a service, getting in that person's head. And so P&G and other places as well are doing research that's really about how do you understand the product from the user's point of view. And that can involve not giving people literal questions and watching from behind a two-way mirror to see how they respond, but actually going into their homes and saying, how do they use toothpaste? How do they use shaving cream? And I think that's, P&G and others have done that. And P&G has made a big push on design thinking, essentially making it part of what it means to be at that company. Now, at the same time, they haven't abandoned serious business metrics. I mean, you still got to make money, you still got to hit your numbers, you still have to, the products still have to perform, but they do a lot of other interesting things where people have a certain amount of autonomy to try a new approach to research or experiment with a new product. So I think the fact that, I like that as an example because it's such a behemoth of a company. And a lot of times when we see size, we say, oh, there's no way any of this will work in a place like it's only for really small operations. And I think P&G is a good example of doing it in a different way.
So design thinking is being used in Mars in a couple of different ways. I break it down in terms of the what we actually do and the how we work. And so on the side of what we actually do, we have a GM in one of our Latin America businesses who took her 100 employees, we call them associates, but they're basically employees, out into the field, into channels, retail channels that we currently don't have products in. And she asked them to use the basic components of design thinking like observation, ethnography, question asking, and interviews to help understand what could we do to get in this channel and how might this channel allow us to make a big difference in the way our products reach our customers. So that's a what piece. On the other end of the scale is how. The how we work. And so when we look at organizations today, it's vastly changing. Mars has gone through huge transformation in terms of the way that we work. And one of our GMs in the Asia Pac region actually took his top 40 leaders through a breakthrough thinking process, understanding how do we allow new ideas to become a part of the challenges around what we work. Things like how do we attract new talent? Things like how do we need to reward our employees and our associates to do the kind of work we need to get done? Things like how do we have to show up as a leadership team in our meetings to actually bring the best and the most potential to bear? And so what they did was they worked those challenges, which typically aren't a part of traditional idea generation, traditional brainstorming, but that was an example of where they applied design thinking, clarifying a challenge, ideation, prototyping to the how we work as opposed to just the what we do.
I am actually fairly bullish about the staying power of design thinking. I really am. Only because if you follow the trajectory of just the discussion of business in design, it isn't like one of those management fads where you can kind of see it fading away, where fewer people are talking about it. You see that it has this pretty steady trajectory. And I don't think that it's risen too quickly. A lot of times you have a business management fad that that has a kind of supernova trajectory where it explodes and everybo's talking about it and then it disappears. Whereas I think that design thinking has had a slower, steadier trajectory, and I think that more people truly are understanding it. Now, I think that the phrase design thinking still is not necessarily the most resonant phrase, because I do think that even the word design, in some people's heads, is freighted with the meaning of sort of ornamentation or prettifying things. And so I'm glad to see the introduction of thinking along with design. But it really is just a form of problem solving.
Inefficiency and ambiguity are both conditions of the design process. There has to be time for reflection and disagreement. And these are core to great new big ideas, but reflection and disagreement are the things that make processes inefficient. And it's important to have time within your process to take a step back and look at, what did we create? Where are the connections that we're not seeing? Can we bring these two things together in ways that we hadn't thought of before? I mean, that's really where great ideas come from. You also have to have time for disagreement, because good design thinking is about bringing very different points of view together so that you have that diverse set of inputs. If you want efficiency, you get everybody who thinks the same way and they'll get to a decision quickly. And that works 80% of the time. But for that 20% of the time where you need something very disruptive, very innovative, very creative, you're going to have to put up with a little bit more of the ambiguity. That's ultimately what a successful leader will be able to do, is understand there are some projects that can follow this very linear, straightforward approach, but others that require a little bit more of an open mind and a little bit more creativity.
I just think that the metaphor of the algorithm is really powerful. And we're always looking for the algorithm. We're always looking for the set of rules and techniques and steps we can follow. Or I'll give you a less nerdy analogy. We're always looking for the perfect recipe, okay? Add these 5 ingredients, mix 3 times, cook at a certain temperature, and all will be right with the world. And that's not it. If that is what we're after, we're leading down the wrong path. It is more akin to, as you say, a value system. It is more akin, I think, in some ways to a literacy in a way. It's a matter of understanding the vocabulary and having the syntax and understanding how the language works and being able to express yourself in that language. That is, there's a difference between mastering a language and actually merely knowing the rules of grammar. One is a very impoverished learning. The other one is rich and robust. And we need to steer in that direction and recognize that the search for the recipe, for the algorithm, is essentially an impossible search.